Useless Monster by Mute Crows, Chapter 8, or Chapter 7. Yagi wrapped his arms around Izuku, intending to give him a more solid hug, an intention that was immediately dropped when Izuku's whole body flinched and he choked on his tears, whining softly in pain. He pulled his hands away quickly, eyes widening in shock at the response. He looked down the bag on the ground as he put a hand back on the boy's head, fingers running through his hair as an attempt to comfort. Izuku continued to cry with his hands digging into his shirt, sobs shaking his entire frame. The bag was burnt horribly, charred patches across the sides, and one strap melted through completely, its state of ruin a glaring red flag. He knew now, more than ever, that the bag was incredibly important to his successor for multiple reasons, and that he wouldn't just allow it to be damaged. In fact, Izuku seemed to be favoring his entire torso and arms. He was skinnier, too, by a decent amount. He was injured and clearly having to run on his rations of whatever the boy had in place to stay alive. At least he hoped Izuku had plans to keep himself alive as best he could. The wounds that he was clearly trying to hide were hard to piece out. He couldn't think of any reason Izuku would be attacked beyond random chance, or being found in his monster form. He was an incredibly kind boy. There was no incentive to actively attack him.
Was this because you were found?
Yagi didn't move. He didn't want to let Izuku go, in all honesty. He would take him to his agency-run apartment if he could, but he also knew Izuku wouldn't just accept that. Izuku shook his head, sobs quieting as he worked it out of his system.
Do you know who hurt you?
He didn't get a response. Another red flag. He looked around and debated his options for a moment.
When did you last eat, Izuku?
Another non-response. He sighed before he pulled away from Izuku reluctantly.
Let's get you something to eat, my boy. It'll be someplace quiet.
They walk quietly, Yagi carrying the bag and Izuku holding onto his own shirt, eyes glassy and red from crying. It's just a small ramen shop that he ducks into with his silent successor in tow. He orders for him and just gets some water for himself. He sits close to him protectively, watching how he picks at his food and barely eats. There could be any number of reasons behind why Izuku couldn't bring himself to eat. Yagi can feel the tension and nervous energy in him, so he begins to just ramble. It's about nothing in particular. Things he has had to do in his offices, worded as discreetly as possible, being that they were in public and people tended to pay attention when All Might was involved. Different adjustments he has had to make to accommodate the soon-to-be steady school schedule, and so on. It was only when the tension in Izuku's body slipped ever so slightly away that he slowed his ramble. Izuku picked at the likely cold, half-empty bowl of ramen.
Do you have anything to do today?
He takes a sip of his water. No.
Well, let's get you a bag that isn't on its last leg then. I feel you have gotten your money's worth out of this one at this point.
He gave him a small smile, leaning down and grabbing the bag from their feet. Any chance to offer Izuku assistance was one he was going to take at this point. He worried constantly about the likely harsh environments that would not help the boy grow and flourish like he should be able to at this age. I can't afford a new one, Yagi-san. I can't even afford this meal. Izuku looked at him, seemingly distant.
I am aware. That's why I will be paying for both, since I can afford to pay for both, Izuku.
He stood up and stretched a bit. Izuku seemed caught in the middle of some kind of internal debate.
Allow me this kindness, my boy.
Yagi waited patiently for Izuku to hop down from the stool that he had been sitting in, paid for the meal, and led the way to the closest store that would have the style of backpack he had in mind. The perks of being in a somewhat big city, meaning he didn't have to go too terribly far. Izuku follows at his side as they wander towards the outdoors section of the building they entered. He figured a bag actually meant for wear and tear would hold up better than a regular school bag. Especially with Izuku living wherever it is he lives. He hoped the boy found some sort of tent camp that cropped up as they often do around town to stay in. The cold would do nothing to help his health, healing quirk or not. They stood in the aisle, going over the different bags, of which Yagi kept pushing Izuku to stop looking at the price and grab one that would hold his belongings and then some reliably and safely. The browsing set at a leisurely pace. He was grabbing another bag that would likely be good and was also not very expensive, aiming for a middle ground with the boy, when Izuku looked to the side. Yagi watched all the tension whip back into Izuku in a single breath. He followed his gaze to find a blonde woman pushing a cart full of various items, completely unassuming, but the way Izuku reacted had him on edge. She looked up from a list in her hand and perked up at the sight of the boy, grinning and turning their direction.
Izuku, it's been so long!
She grinned excitedly and walked over. Izuku, tense and clearly uncomfortable as he was, still firmly placed himself between him and the woman.
Katsuki refuses to give me actual updates on you and Inko these days, brat. How are you two?
She looked up at Yagi with a calculating eye.
And it was this man.
The mention of Izuku's mother in a present way let him know that this woman didn't actually have the full scope of knowing Izuku. Before he could reply, something seemed to click in a slightly unsettling way in the boy, the tension seeming to drop as he smiled, hollowly. The expression not quite reaching his eyes. "We are doing as well as we can, Bakugo Oba-san. Mom has been working overtime lately, so I haven't gotten around to the whole phone call thing. She pretty much sleeps the whole time she is home, and then is off to work again. Oh, and, this is Yagi-san, a friend." The chipper voice coming from Izuku after holding the boy as he sobbed in a mix of exhaustion, pain, and grief just hours earlier was jarring. Astoundingly so, with how despondent he was walking into the store. Yet Yagi waved as he was introduced, putting the bag back on its hook.
"Hello, Bakugo-san. It's a pleasure to meet you."
He held out a hand past Izuku, subtly switching the positions, so he was slightly more in front of him. She looked at the hand a beat before taking it in an absurdly aggressive grip for a handshake, pressure that he meant in kind if only to show his sureness of his position. Something about this woman had Izuku on edge, and he wanted to end the situation as fast as possible.
Same as well. I had never heard of you before now, even from Katsuki, who does tell about new faces in his own way. I stay in that loop much more easily than actual details. How long have you known the Midoriyas?
"A few months. I find they are incredibly kind people from the short instances of seeing his mother, and the longer times I've gotten to talk with young Midoriya himself. We came to get a new bag since he got into UA.
He smiled his usual stage smile, although it felt strange to use in his thinner form.
That must be why my son is so short-tempered lately, more so than usual.
She waved a hand dismissively before giving Izuku a soft smile.
I'm proud of you, Izuku, and I know my husband would say the same if he was with me right now.
Thank you, ma'am. Izuku smiled back and turned back to the bags.
Always good-mannered, this kid. Anyways, I gotta finish this shopping and get going on dinner. It was good to see you, Izuku. Tell Inko she better call me. She might as well have vanished for that long she has been ghosting me.
She turned and left the aisle, waving over her shoulder. Yagi watched her go. After a few moments, Izuku let out a quiet breath as he held out the last bag Yagi had been looking at. Exhaustion seemed to be weighing on him sevenfold. Can we leave now, Yagi-san? His eyes stayed on the floor.
"Of course, my boy. Let's check out."
He took the bag from him and guided him to the lines. They were out within 10 minutes. Outside the store, he pulled the tag off of the new bag and held both bags out to Izuku. He took them and carried one in each hand, further signs that his torso was injured rather badly. They stood in silence for a moment, Izuku not looking at him and instead at the street where the lights were turning on. Is there any way you would let me offer medical help, my boy? You deny so much of the help you deserve, and I don't say that lightly. Yagi took a deep breath, knowing the answer to his own question already. So he asks another.
"Do you have any ways to pass time?"
Izuku shook his head.
"Well, with the acceptance into UA, you need to have a hero costume designed. You can think about ideas for that."
He smiled gently as a bit of unfocused thought leaked in the green eyes.
"A costume should accent what you can do and show who you are in the same instance. It takes a while to find your image, so don't feel too pressured on your first design concepts. Play around with it, and I will have the actual costume submissions for you when they should be getting mailed out."
Thank you.
"Of course, Izuku. I'll see you tomorrow, okay?"
It was a promise as much as a question, and he was thrilled when the boy nodded before turning to part ways. Good night, Yagi-san.
"Good night, my boy."
He watched him walk for a few moments before turning towards his apartment. He had some bento to make. Izuku ended up losing all but one of his jobs from his vanishing act. The fact that, while expected, still sucked. Luckily, he managed to find a second one the day before. He doesn't think he will ever be able to fully convey how grateful he is to Yagi. The man has done so much to help him, even with Izuku keeping things to himself more often than not. It's an impulse more than anything else at this point, a defense against the harshness he knows so well in the world. Yagi had begun leaving him with a bento to pick at over the night until they would meet again the next day. A system that Izuku insisted wasn't necessary, only to have Yagi insist it was a benefit for both of them since it would put his mind at ease and food in Izuku's stomach. It's thanks to this that Izuku shows up to his first day at UA fully healed and with some weight put back on that he had started to lose. He fixed the tie he haphazardly attempted tying as best as he could and wandered through the streets. "Oh, bad luck, kid!" A voice called his attention when he was near the front doors of the school. He turned in confusion. A paw hand waved him down and a bright grin spread across the face of the cat-headed boy, who was followed by another cat-headed boy and a person who seemed to be made of water. Water boy waved and seemed to smile, but had no mouth for Izuku to really be sure. Izuku waved generally back, not sure where to place the trio, at least not until the bell on the calico's collar jingled softly with their approach. "Oh, the charm, right? Yeah, it's really rad that you remember that much, especially since it was admittedly out of the blue. Do you remember my name?" Izuku just shook his head and followed the trio into the building. Well, let's do a round of introductions then. It's always good to know some of your higher classmen. I'm Yuka, that's my brother Fuzen, and this is our buddy Oob. That's not his actual name, but he likes going by it. He's mute because of his quirk. Yuka's tone was bubbly and excited. "Hello, man, I'm charmed to run into you at UA. I thought I was gonna have to stake out the library to find you again." He plowed straight on with his topics, Fuzen rolling his eyes off to the side. "How well did the little thing work? What happened when it wore off? Did you notice when it wore off? Thoughts on it overall?" One second." Izuku pulled his bag around and dug into his front pocket of his bag and pulled out the charm. He held it up for the boy to see, the reveal of him having kept it apparently shocking. "It really saved my hide, and when it wore off, the bell fell off. I can't thank you enough for the short time it was working, Yuka-san." "You kept it even after it stopped working." He cradled it and inspected the small thing, mumbling softly to himself. He let it go and grinned. "Talk about holding aces. How sweet, though." Izuku nodded and put the charm back sheepishly. "It was a gift. No reason to toss it just because it wasn't lucky anymore." A bell pinged once through the intercom. Oob waved to catch their attention before his hands moved rapidly. It was completely lost on Izuku. "Oh, man, right! What class are you in?" Yuka looked at Izuku again. "Midoriya, and I'm in 1A. I was gonna look for the class, but He looked around as he swung his bag on properly. "Got distracted by this. You're in the hero course! That's so cool! We are too! What a coincidence that—" "Yuka, you're gonna make all of us late, and you are the one who is usually honest about it." Fuzen grumbled as he slapped Yuka's side with his tail, the bell tied to it, chiming. "Go back that way and take a right. It's near the end of the hall. It has a giant label on it, so if you miss it, that's on you. Now let's go." Tail flicking wildly at the end, he stalked away, the bell completely taking away from the clear frustration. A wave in his direction, and the two behind hastily followed. "That was strange." Izuku watched them a beat before turning and hurrying in the direction he was pointed in, hoping against hope that he is in the same class as Bakugo, but, as Yuka ever so kindly confirmed, he has bad luck. The growing sound of familiar shouting at his crawling muscle tensing in anticipation for literally anything, and confirmed his thoughts as he stood in front of a giant door, indeed blatantly plastered with the label 1A down its height. An equally loud but much less aggressive voice was responding in tandem with Bakugo, introducing itself as Ida Tenya in the same moment that Izuku pulled the door open. Bakugo turned at the door opening, legs kicked up on the desk in his usual cocky way, and leveled Izuku with a glare that made him want to bolt. Not that he would. He earned his place here and had a level of support that he knew would drive
Bakugo mad!
A blue-haired boy with red eyes and glasses stood stiffly next to him and suddenly moved towards Izuku in a flurry of gestures. It made his recently much more skittish nerves scream silently, but he didn't retreat from the stranger.
Hello, my name is Ida.
Tanya, I heard! Izuku held his hands up appeasingly, not sure how to take the fast and sharply crisp movements of his apparent classmate. He swallowed his nerves as subtly as he could. I'm Midoriya!
Well, I must say you accomplished some astounding feats in the exam. You made it!
A more familiar voice came from behind him, actually making him jump! His full attention having been on the two louder and rowdier in their own ways boys in front of him. He turned and found the girl he healed, the one that spoke in his favor to Mike. She hopped in place a bit as she threw a hand up in a tear.
I'm so glad! You were already looking hurt and then you just...
She made an exaggerated bunching sound.
To that robot!
She continued her rambling recount, Ida apparently hopping in on the chance to point out something about Izuku knowing more about the test. This was only distantly registered as Izuku felt the approach of familiar burning eyes. He looked past the girl and spotted a yellow sleeping bag on the floor steadily approaching in a worm-like way. It unzipped to allow Eraserhead's sharply uninterested gaze to meet his before drifting past to the animated back and forth the girl and Ida had gotten in their joint story sharing, now standing next to each other.
Shut it.
His tired rumble cut through the energy faster than anyone could blink.
This is the heroics course, not a daycare to make friends.
Izuku couldn't help but regard the hero cautiously. He knew about the monster, after all, just not that the monster was right in front of him. Whispers of confusion took a few seconds to go completely silent as Eraserhead stood and slipped out of the sleeping bag.
That was too long. We will work on that. I'm going to be your homeroom teacher, Aizawa Shada. A pleasure to see you all.
His delivery made the phrase seem hollower than an empty building. He reached into the sleeping bag and tossed a uniform at Izuku, being that he was closest, and continued to pull out more and toss them to students, methodically.
Put these on and get your collective bodies over to the PE fields. You have 15 minutes.
Then he just headed out, bag under his arm and a juice pouch in hand. The class watched in shock for a moment before a blonde kid with a black streak hopped up with an excited grin.
Race to the locker rooms!
That seemed to be all the energy needed in the room to kick everyone into gear, all of them quickly depositing their bags at their desks, and a majority of them rushing up with their gym uniforms in hand. A few, including Izuku, lagged behind a short distance and watched their gas! The locker rooms held a rather high-octane level of boisterousness as boys around the room chatted excitedly about what they could be doing so fast on day one of hero classes. Izuku watched them all, listening carefully as he changed, feeling some passing looks at the scattered scarring he had on his torso from sloppy healing, be it from stress, hunger, or any other wrench in his healing system. A tall purple-haired kid gave him a considering look before heading out of the locker room. When he finally made it out to the field, somehow ahead of the group, even though he left about mid-exodus, although we guess none of them had the benefit of being able to pinpoint their teacher based off a likely chronic pain. Some of the students saw his sure direction and followed after him, including the girl he should probably learn the name of. The rest of the class figured it out themselves and happened to meet up with his following. Aizawa was standing at the edge of a field, tapping away at something on his phone, with various marked-off sections and some robots sitting around in different locations. The class was quiet as they collectively approached.
All right. Time to see what you all can do.
He turned towards them, one hand slipped into a pocket. Izuku listened to the general shock of everyone around him and felt that the disinterested look on the face of the man in front of him, whose sharp eyes felt like a razor's edge as it pinned him once more, was a carefully maintained construct. He subconsciously tightened his grip on his form, fear settling into him even more than before. It was screwed. One slip and Bakugo would go for him again. One slip and his secret was caught by Aizawa, who, from the way he kept inspecting him, probably already suspected him. One slip and he would have to be off the map entirely by his own choice or by the will of someone else. Aizawa went over the logistics of the test. Students protested, only to be shut down.
I already told you. This is the heroics course. There will be no easygoing coddling. You will either leave my class ready for your futures, or you will not be in my class at all. Bagagokatsuki.
The boy stood taller at his name.
Scoredized in the practical exam. How far could you throw a pitch in middle school? 67 meters!
Smug pride dripped from his tone at the statement of his exam placement. A ball was thrown to him, caught smoothly.
Throw this. Use your quirk to your highest capacity to maximize your distance. Leave the circle and your pitch will be negated.
Something Izuku noted was to keep all students in his line of sight. He knew the stance from experience. Bagago got a mad grin on his face, and Izuku test preparing himself for the explosion that was to follow. His torso ached faintly with the memory of how direct impact from those explosions felt. Resounding taunts and insults echoed in Bagago's voice as he shouted, "Die!" to accent his pitch. The flinch at the explosion was involuntary but small. He hoped no one noticed. Aizawa turned his phone screen to the class to reveal the incredible distance the ball had traveled. Stunned sounds of excited students ready to show off their abilities surrounded Izuku, who was fighting off mental ghosts that threatened to undo him in the middle of the day. Maybe being a heroic student was a mistake. Maybe Yagi was wrong to trust him with all of this. He was flinching at a simple sound. It was foolish, stupid.
This is the beginning of your foundation. You will be expected to each build off of your respective highest limits.
Dude, this looks so fun! A red-haired kid bounced excitedly and played sharp teeth, showing a wide grin.
Oh, is that how you are approaching this course?
Aizawa raised a brow.
Heroes must exemplify flexibility and dynamism in their abilities. No situation is exactly as expected, and no hero can know every detail before going into a situation. Your job will be to succeed, even with the odds against you. The school holds proud to the motto Plus Ultra, claiming that this is the least we can do. So for this test, if you come in last, you will be expelled on the spot. I have no time for those with no potential.
What? It's our first day! That's wildly unreasonable!
The girl stepped forward as she spoke, standing in front of the group. Aizawa pushed his hair out of his face, and Izuku felt the way his eyes twitched. Frustration, stress, or general irritation must have a hand in the strength of whatever makes his eyes hurt. He felt the innate urge to grab it, but he needed to have full capabilities with this test. He let it be.
The way the world works is unreasonable. Natural disasters, villain uprisings, accidents, mass shootings, disease outbreaks, and so on. Across countries, not just our own, the world is constantly going to be out of your favor. Even the undeserving get the short straw. Even the altruistic get killed or used as bait to kill others. The universe at large is messy, and as heroes in training, you will have to battle up that stream at all times to pull others to shore. This is what you signed up for. Prove your worth and will. Best these trials and stake your claim at the peak of your current abilities, and keep on climbing. Go beyond. Plus Ultra.
He listed 2 more names as he walked to a different section of the field. The first tests had begun. Izuku found himself detached from his own body again, body on autopilot for the tasks set out for them to complete. The other kids in his class held bubbly and determined energy for the most part. They had incredible skills that he could definitely see taking them far in the hero world. The dash had him almost trip at the first glimpse of fire in his direction from Bakugo's hands, but he still sprinted across the line as fast as he could. Almost 6 seconds, which was a smidge better than his average middle school times. He knew if he ever clocked how fast he was in his other form, he would probably decimate his entire class aside from Ida, if he was to guess. He would always be at a handicap from his highest limits, as Aizawa had called them. The world claimed lack of appearance-based discrimination with the rise of quirks, but Izuku had no faith. He knew people. He knew how he was treated and responded to as a monster. In the hero world, looks were everything, and civilians still aimed for a modicum of normality. Normality was a fake word, truly. Those with villainous or monstrous quirks were left for the shadows and underworld of crime. They had to scavenge for a job or any form of income or stability or just a basic level of fair treatment. This he could speak for from his years of experience in such an area. People fear what they don't understand. The unknown was the basis for all fear, even before quirks came into play, and now a beast that didn't originate from a quirk? That was the least known of all. He ended up meeting Aizawa's eyes a few times through the tests, often after a particularly large explosion from Wakago. It had him feeling anxious. He couldn't figure out what the purpose behind the looks were, or if he was just overanalyzing things. They finally got around to the ball pitches again, and he watched the others step up to the ring confidently. He was well aware that he was likely low in the rankings at this point, not that there was much he could do, since any time he tried to grab it one for all, he could feel the strain in his bones that were not able to handle the full brunt of the quirk yet. So he hadn't tried to use it in full. Anxiety thrummed through him, and he could hear his own pulse in his ears. Overall, not great internal standings. He felt like he was going to be overwhelmed by his own mind when a comforting strain approached the field, stopping a short distance away. He glanced over and saw All Might peeking from behind the edge of the building, and the static beat of his pulse quieted. He gave a gentle tug on the ache coming from his one lung and almost smiled at the slight jump of surprise from the hero. Of course, All Might would be curious about the class. He knew Izuku has had a run-in with Eraserhead before, so it wasn't all that shocking. He would at least attempt to check on the first day.
Midoriya, Izuku, you're next.
Aizawa's voice cut through the sudden calm of his mind, tossing a ball that Izuku easily caught. A breath. He touched the surface of glowing flames that made up one for all in consideration as he walked into the painted ring. He could hear the mocking jabs of Bakugo being met with confusion for the students who had apparently been in his testing area. A breath. He dipped his fingers briefly into the warmth, feeling the way his bones wanted to deconstruct in response. All Might's strained use of One for All flared in response. He may as well try. A broken bone is nothing new to him. A breath. He grabbed the core of the flame, the gentle warmth turning into a searing burn as his bones began to strain to their limits. He reared his arm back and felt the spike in eye irritation before he let the flames go out, along with the ability to feel any of the class's aches at all. Regardless, he still let the ball fly. He turned to see Aizawa's eyes glowing, something he hadn't noticed the first time due to the goggles. The class made noises of surprise at the sudden change in the man's demeanor, the way his capture weapon unwound and lifted off his person in a mildly threatening way, making a few shuffle back. Izuku saw the way his eyes narrowed at his lack of response to the loss of both of his quirks. Too late to add any kind of theatrics that would be expected from a person who lost their quirk for the first time, figured, so he just did the only response he could really think of having at this point. He gave him a slight bow, more of a nod, honestly. Eraserhead, I've heard of you.